So I wanted to give you just a quick um, video to help you with your bracketing exercise. Um, Bracketing it's actually a really simple concept, and if you've been following along with our series on exposure and camera operations, this should make a lot of sense to you. So to really quickly jump in here, bracketing is making several different exposures of the same scene, but using your shutter speed or your aperture to go from one stop to the next. So you're seeing the variation in your image based on different exposures. So this set of images here kind of illustrate that. So if we look here at this middle image, we can call this normal, or whatever our light meter is telling us the correct shutter speed aperture combination is based on our ISO reading. Okay, so you see in this middle image here, everything is pretty evenly exposed, right? You can see some areas in the highlights here, over in this area as well. If you look here in these shadows, you can start to see a little bit of detail, albeit not too much. So it's a pretty evenly exposed image. Now, if we were to go to the right, this image here, we would probably call this image exposing +1, or giving one stop more exposure than the other image, okay? And the reason we know that is because if we look now at this window here, you start to see that it's much brighter. This is actually, if you remember back from your shutter speed lecture video, this is 2 times as much light coming in to this image from the middle image, okay? So you look at these posters, you start to see they become more white. Up in the ceiling is a bit more white as well. You can also tell by looking in the shadows here that her back is now a bit more lit. You can see the texture and the design of her shirt here. Even down here in these areas, you can see some of the detail happening. Okay, so this is what we would call one stop overexposed. And if we go to the opposite direction here on the left-hand side of our images, this would be one stop underexposed. Okay, so you can think about this as like n for normal +1 -1. Okay, and in this image is now one stop underexposed from our normal exposure. And again, you can tell, you can start to look at some of the areas in the image that we had looked at before. So this image here has the window again, and in the window, you can start to see a lot more of the details here. So you can start to see the division in the window planes, which actually looks quite nice. However, if we look at the rest of the image, everything turned really dark. So now if you look at this figure here in the foreground, you can't really see much detail in the shirt. You can kind of make out the outline of the figure. These areas here down where the chair is are totally blocked up. You can't really see any detail from the exposure. And overall, it looks pretty dark. So again, we have here an underexposed image by one stop, and this is half the amount of light coming into the camera than the normally exposed image. Okay, so the reason we bracket is because sometimes we're not sure what the correct exposure is if we have a tough lighting situation, kind of like in this one where we have this window that's in the middle of the image. It's letting in a lot of light, but the outside areas around it are a lot less lit, so it's kind of challenging to manage this this bright light with all the other things that are situated around it. Okay. So this is an example of what maybe your shutter speed aperture combination would be, should you want to bracket. Okay. So what you're going to do when you bracket is you're going to fix one of these. Okay. So you're going to take a meter reading from the overall scene. Let's just say, for example, in this one, it's 1/60th of a second at 5.6. In order to bracket, what you're going to do is you're going to fix one of them. So in this case, we're going to be fixing the shutter speed here. We're not going to change that. And then we would make an exposure at our normal at 1/60th of a second with 5.6. And then we would open up our lens. So we're going one stop over by letting double the amount of light in by opening up our aperture at f4, still staying at 1/60th of a second. And then if we were to overexpose by 2 stops, so we're here, f5.6, then 5.4, and now we're going to expose at f2.8, still at 60th of a second. Now we're 2 stops overexposed, okay? Also, we are letting in 4 times as amount as light than 5.6, because remember, we have double the amount of light from one stop to the next, and then if we go again, we double that, so it's 2, 4, okay? And this last slide is kind of a example of, you know, a large amount of bracketing, okay? So we probably go, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stops, right, from the beginning exposure. Oops, go back. So here in this bottom right corner probably is towards what our normal would be. You can see that there's information here in this foreground area with all the choyas. You can still see some information down in this background in the mountains, and then in the sky you have a little bit of cloud detail, not as much, but you can still see some cloud detail. Then as we go up through the image, we're stopping down by 1 stop, so half the amount of light. Still can make out some information down here in the foreground. The sky is becoming a bit more dramatic. Then over here in this middle right image, again, we're going 1 stop less exposed, so this is half the amount of light. This is 4 times less light. The sky is becoming pretty dramatic. You can still see some information down here, although it's getting kind of dark. The next image over here, this is going to be, let's see, 2, 4, 8 times less light. Again, getting much darker. This is starting to become unreadable in the foreground. The sky is becoming a little more dramatic because of the darkness in the clouds and these highlights from the sun, from the setting of it over the mountains. Then 16 times less light, or 4 stops less. Not really a workable image, everything a little bit too dark. And then if we go to 32 times less light, or 5 stops less than our original exposure, we can see this is pretty much an unusable image. It's just totally blocked up here in the foreground, and in the sky it's just too dark, okay? So this is an example of what bracketing can do for you when you're in the field. If you're ever unsure about what exposure to use, just go ahead and bracket. And the nice thing about digital photography is that you're not limited to the amount of exposures you have on your film. You have much more exposures on your digital SD card than you would on a piece of film. So it's a good tool to use, and for your exercise, I think it's really going to help you understand just how the functions of shutter speed and aperture work in regards to stops and with exposure. Okay, so I hope this is helpful for your bracketing exercise, and good luck.